Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Good
All
morning.
right, I found my energy. I
There we
found
go.
it in the 30 seconds since we last spoke, Jeff and Chris. I've woken up and I'm here. How are you guys? Are you awake? What's going on over there?
I just finished my own Celsius just a second ago.
Oh my gosh, man, those things blow my head up. I don't know how you drink those.
Are we going to make
There's
it
like
through the show, Jeff?
Good for one a day.
one a day, one a day. Okay, that makes sense. What about you, Chris?
I'm all caffeinated up on coffee and good to go.
All right, great, cool. Christian, you want to kick it off for us?
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We have two guests today to join us. One which you may have heard of as well around recent news. Chris Burroughs, who's I believe, the VP of Government Affairs at TIA now. He will be transitioning over into the role of CEO. And Jeff, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I'm not as familiar with you as I am with Chris. So I'll let you.
Let's let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, let's have you introduce yourselves.
Go ahead,
Jeff.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so just you mentioned Chris. I'll just say that I was there when Chris was hired and worked with him for every single year since he's been at TIA, and just an outstanding mind, outstanding person. So I won't get into Chris's news, but we're super happy for him.
Cool.
My name is Jeff Tucker. I'm CEO of Tucker Company Worldwide. We're the oldest privately held freight broker in the United States.
Wow.
Third generation in the business. And believe it or not, in 1978, just before deregulation, my dad, along with 7 or 8 other guys from the industry, the very few brokers at the time, founded TIA in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I'm the past, chairman of the board of TIA, and happy to be here.
I was at TIA in April in Phoenix. Were you on stage then, Jeff? I believe they were talking about. Did they talk about your dad there?
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it was. Okay, that's ringing a bell.
Yeah, my dad passed away a year ago.
Yeah.
And they recognized him with a scholarship, an ongoing scholarship.
Yeah. Okay. That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, we could probably spend an entire episode learning about because you probably grew up around freight brokerage then, which is crazy, right? Because not a lot of people have done that, especially that early on. So, I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of history and knowledge and legacy there. It's fun.
And so TIA, just for a little background, I guess, Chris, we already kind of introed you, unless you want to harp on that some more. But I'm curious, can you guys talk about I mean, TIA has been there since basically the beginning. Then when did they found it, Jeff?
It's 1978. It was they were anticipating, right? President Carter started deregulation, and President Reagan sort of continued it, and it kept going.
Okay.
And they started saying, hey, maybe this thing's going to take off, and we should maybe get together and create a trade association.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. They had some foresight, and now it's obviously been however many years that's been, almost 40.
It's quite
over 40. Over 40. Yeah.
Over 40 years, and it's been quite a large player and participant. In particularly a lot of active conversations that have been taking place more recently about fraud. But what was the role that TIA played in the early 80s, 90s? What was the association basically helping out with at the in the beginning or in the early days?
Well, there was a lot. So we were coming out of a heavily regulated period of time, right, where you had to go to the government to get authority. If you wanted to go from Philly to Chicago, you need to ask the government for permission to do that. And the government would say either yes or no, or your competitors would say, nah, we don't need those guys. And that was enough, right? So it went from a very regimented system to a system where you could contract with one another without asking the government for permission to do so, right? So in the beginning, it was in a whole new world. It was an absolute, frontier, and there were a lot of bad actors back then, just like there are this whole idea of fraud. There was a lot of bad actors there back then as there are today, in all aspects of freight. And a lot of carriers came up and went out because they couldn't, and a lot of bad actors pretending to be brokers or being brokers came in and went out. And so what TIA was, it was called the Transportation Brokers Conference of America, TBCA. And what they were trying to do was just like, what are best practices? Let's elevate this industry. And the thought process, as one of my dad's favorite sayings was, rising tide raises all ships. So he and those other guys that put that together, they had meetings every year. They had regional meetings too, like best practices. How should you, conduct yourself? What should the industry, what position should the industry take? There was so much change happening in 1980, 80 through 85. Thousands and thousands of carriers being minted during that time. Believe it or not, you needed a shipper or a broker. If you were a carrier, you needed a shipper or a broker to sponsor you to get your contract authority.
Oh, wow.
Unheard of today.
Like an immigration visa, basically.
So I know our company sponsored hundreds, probably thousands, through those early years of carriers to get into business. So it was entirely different, but I was in those early meetings. I remember my dad brought me to one when I was literally a kid, and he pointed out, he's like, see this group of people? So, yeah, he goes, these are all competitors, and I like, it means nothing, and I just want to go to the pool, but I remember this, right? I remember this vividly. Like, these are all competitors, and they're all teaching each other how to be better business people. And if you go to TIA's meetings today, it's exactly the same way, 44 years ago, and it's really it's an exceptional group. And the values and the ethics and what the group stands for is just amazing.
And obviously, like, the education component, I know you have certifications and stuff like that folks take seriously, which is cool. I mean, because you really, like, I worked at Echo for 5 years right out of college, and I had no idea what a freight broker was. Even when I walked in the door, I had no idea. I went through the whole interview and I still probably didn't really know. and so it's cool to know that there are options out there for people to actually, like, from a third party, not like on the job training, right? And I'm sure it's been honed. It's a curriculum that's probably been honed over the entire history of the organization too. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting. I guess, Chris, can you, that's in the history of TIA, I'm sure kind of the focus on, issues from like the government side of things has ebbed and flowed. Maybe can you talk about like what's top of mind for you in your current role as government affairs?
Yeah, absolutely, Reed. We just had our annual fly-in, or we call it our policy forum, where we have over 100 TI members travel to Washington, D.C. here and kind of participate in our advocacy efforts. And the three topics that were really top of mind that we talked about at the fly-in, one is obviously this rampant freight fraud that we're all being faced with. We have a bipartisan piece of legislation that we've been working on with a number of other great organizations like OIDA to combat this, to really give authority back to the FMCSA to get them off the sidelines and get them back on the field in terms of enforcing some of these bad players that are in the space that's costing the industry roughly $1 billion a year, which obviously is passed on to consumers. Everyone's feeling the crunch of this freight fraud in the marketplace. Two is we're big strong proponents of independent contractors. There's been several rulemakings and laws out of the state of California, for instance, with AB 5. They're really kind of attacking that independent contractor model, that flexibility that's important to truck drivers, that flexibility that's important to a lot of our members who utilize sales agents in that role as ICs. That's a big issue for us. And then also flagging for members of Congress this upcoming pending rulemaking dealing with broker transparency that OIDA has filed with the FMCSA, educating folks on that, talking about, let Jeff go into kind of the history of it because of his knowledge of it, but talking about when this rule was put in place in 1980 versus what the current marketplace looked like is obviously drastically different, and the way the industry operates is nothing of that sort.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to kind of go into that. I guess just for a little context for folks who might, I mean, Jeff, I'll let you provide some context, but I guess I'll just say that my understanding, based on purely on my being on Twitter and seeing people argue about this for 2 or 3 years, is like there is a law on the books currently, like I can't remember the number, something CFR or whatever, and I'm sure maybe one of you know it.
371.3.
Yeah, that proponents. What's that?
What is the number?
371.3.
Yeah, I figured. That's good on you, Chris. You know it. You know the number. I couldn't remember it. I've seen it a million times. But so the proponents of transparency point to this and say, "Hey, this is not being enforced." That's what I hear. Can one of you, Jeff or Chris, maybe Jeff, kind of take us through the history of this law? Just kind of provide some context for this broker transparency debate.
Sure. Chris, you want me to take this stab at this?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'll chime in.
Let me. So I'll share my screen just real quick. I pulled up 371.3 just so that we can show the audience like actually what this is, and then Chris, feel free to basically give the context kind of around this. Do I have the correct one pulled up?
Yep.
Okay. So this basically, it seems like this is that a broker shall keep the record of each transaction, and this pertains to the topic of the transparency debate, whether or not brokers should be sharing. I believe sharing rates, as they, based on what they're actually buying or selling that load for. And so, Chris, if you can share just a little bit of insight from your perspective on this.
Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff.
Jeff's in the batter's box right now. He's ready to roll. He's ready to roll.
Chris, no?
Happy to. So the C is is I think the relevant point that is being sort of seized upon, let's say, and that is each has the right to review the record of the transaction kept by these rules. So I want to kind of bring you back, right, to we actually touched on this already. Bring you back to regulatory days. Regulatory days. If Chris was a trucking company and Reed was a trucking company, handling freight from that Philly to Chicago lane, and Christian, you wanted to get in on that. You had to ask permission from the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which doesn't exist anymore. And let's just say they got permission to move that. They had to then file rates in the Interstate Commerce Commission. And anyone in the public, every single person in the public was able to go into Washington and leaf through papers. And I learned how to read these papers, when in the early days. And they're called tariffs, but you had to leaf through it, right? And then you had to, what's the rate? Okay, that's the rate. Okay, great. And it was all public. So again, getting authority, those guys could veto Christian's authority and say, no, we don't need Christian, right?
Really
huge amount of regulatory burden, but the rates were public. So everyone and anyone knew about rates is they had to be public, they had to be seen. So this rule, this law, was their understanding that, and at the time, just like trucking was regulated, brokerage was regulated. So freight brokers at the time, what we did was we found a shipper, and a shipper would give us a load, and a carrier would handle that load, and the carrier would pay us a commission, a 7% or 12% or whatever the percent was. They would pay us a commission when it was all settled. So the carrier would bill the shipper, and the shipper would pay the carrier. And the only way we got paid, right, is if the carrier gave us our commission. So you had to. It was the law required that transparency. Pardon
the
me?
paperwork would flow straight from the shipper to the carrier, and then basically what changed after deregulation is that the paperwork started to flow through the broker as an intermediary party. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, almost perfectly, right? So, but it's not just that, right? It's what deregulation allowed us to do was to have contracts. So I could now have a contract for carriage. So I could have a contract with my shipper, and a shipper could award me like 100 truckloads a year, totally irrespective of, do I even have a carrier to handle those 100? But now I got a job to do. But then I go out and I make 100 different contracts with 100 different carriers, or maybe I make 2 contracts with 50 carriers. Sorry, 2 contracts, yeah, 2 contracts or 2 carriers, whatever, for the 50 loads. But at the time, the only way I could see if I was getting paid is, I had to be a party to that transaction, right? So that was the primary emphasis, the primary point. But in that was a 1980 rule and regulation, and then later in 1980, the world changed, and everyone started using the freedom to contract with one another, the way it was intended by Congress and 2 presidents, right? So,
Jeff, real quick, I got a question. So, since before deregulation, it essentially was the opposite setup, where the carrier would then have to decide the amount of commission to pay the broker.
they would negotiate. Yeah, they would negotiate.
How was the transparency then? Because the broker, how the broker kind of go about pay me the right commission,
Yeah. So at the time, again, it was only a percentage, right? So I think that's really important, right? So I have sales agents today, and they're not employees, and I pay them a set percent of whatever I make on any business that they give us. It's the same exact that. So we basically, while we were brokers and we were independent contractors, we were our own businesses, we were making a percentage on the freight bill. Today, it's really important to note, today there is no such thing. There's no such thing as, I don't pay a carrier percentage. There's no, I have a rate with the customer, and most of the time, if I'm doing my business right, I'm paying less. I'm finding a competitive rate, paying something less than that.
Right.
Sometimes I'm not. I've got loads next week. I already know I'm paying $280 more than what I have in the load, but it's a good customer, and I'm going to do that every single day of the year. So it's these risks are ones that I run now, and I make those decisions, and I live with them. And the carriers, there's the largest number of carriers are in business today than really ever, aside from the blip in 2022. And there's a lot of choices, so no one's required to take my loads.
So, Paul, hey, welcome,
everyone.
We're talking transparency.
Yeah.
So the law. So I guess what you all are saying is that this law that's on the books was put in place then, kind of with the old scheme in mind. It's kind of like a legacy rule based on how things were, not how things are post deregulation. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I can't say with 100% certainty that there isn't one broker out of the 20,000 that are out there that operates on some commission, scheme.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that it's got to be in the high 99 percentiles that operate with contracts, all private contracts.
Is it, Chris, for you've been in your government role for 6 years, I think I read that. Do I have that right?
13. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Six is BP, but yeah, 13.
Okay, got it. Okay, so how you've obviously been, if you started in your current VP role in 2019, or do I have that? No, 2018. You've been through kind of a lull in the market. I guess it kind of took off in 17, probably started to slow down more in 18. 19 was pretty slow, and then COVID happened and it kind of skyrocketed. How has like this whole transparency debate, like the relevance of it, or how loud the debate was, like how has that ebbed and flowed in your tenure over the last, if you want to do the 13 years, that's fine too. Like how has it ebbed and flowed?
Yeah, when I first started with the association 13 years ago, this issue of transparency was actually one of the issues we were working on, which later became a piece of legislation that was the Fighting Fraud and Transportation Act, which did many things to really clarify the role of a broker, clarify the role that motor carriers can't broker freight without authority. It increased the broker bond from 10 to 75,000. But what brought OOIDA, ATA, and TIA together to work on that piece of legislation was this talk about transparency. And it was a product of the market conditions of the housing crisis of 2008, where the economy obviously tanked. And it seems like whenever the economy is bad, this issue kind of gets raised in terms of transparency. We heard a little bit about it, a few years, maybe a few years later when there was a blip in the economy. And obviously it really escalated dramatically with the COVID pandemic just because of the awful economic conditions that were going on in the beginning of 2020. And that's really when, you saw all those truck protests outside the White House. You had the 2 petitions filed by OOIDA and SBTC to the FMCSA, which is currently pending and supposed to be released for comment at the end of this month, public comment period. So that's, it's come up a few times, certainly. But, this is the first time that since my tenure here, it's been put to a rulemaking. The agency is going to speak on it. I think it's also worth noting, going back a little bit to the history of why, looking at the May 1980 Federal Register notice where the Interstate Commerce Commission talks about this provision. And, there's a lot of text in there about this issue of freight rebating. And this is why there needs to be transparency into the rates, because they were concerned that brokers were charging or receiving a commission or compensation from a motor carrier for, if they had some sort of direct ownership connection with that shipper, kind of double dipping, if you will. But they're also crystal clear in looking at the 2 provisions that OOIDA and SBTC have asked for in terms of, the electronic submission of these rates, and then also asking the FMCSA to step into private contract negotiations and bar certain language or non-disclosure agreements from being included. The ICC, looking at right here, the ICC is crystal clear in their verbiage. Our goal in regulating transactions between brokers, carriers, and shippers is to remove all unnecessary restrictions which might impede the free operation on the marketplace. Obviously, a federal agency stepping in and private contract negotiations is going to impede the free and open marketplace that exists, which Jeff has perfectly described, kind of just exploded after deregulation and certainly exploded after this was put out. So it's obviously on the books. Obviously, the marketplace is drastically different. But to your original question, Reed, whenever there's a downturn in the economy, this issue has come up, and we've had to address it.
Can I just say I'm in my 33rd year in the industry. I've been on the board of directors for the Truckload Carrier Association. I spent about a decade there. I was in the board of directors and chaired the board of directors for TIA, so the carrier side, the broker side. Now today I'm on the board of directors for the shipper organization, National Industrial Transportation. We just had our conference this. So and why? Well, if I'm going to do my job in the middle, I need to really understand both sides' issues, but also my own issues. And I can tell you, to add even a little bit more color, Christian, to your question. That was your question. When late 2000 to 2002, the shippers were so angry, like it just, because rates were just so high. And there were no carriers complaining during that time. I can tell you that like our contract rates, that we had that were stable contract rates got blown away, and our margins went to so. But from our perspective, we look at this like clinically, like this is a free market, right? And it's up to us to kind of like figure this out. But what you have is, just as Chris mentioned, You'll have during the tough times, the carriers are angry at the shippers and brokers. During the good times, the shippers are angry at the brokers and the carriers. My education, anytime I have the opportunity, I was like, hey, folks, listen, there's no emotion here. How do we better operate? How do we think through this? And to me, like, if I have come back after I'm done this job, I want to start a trade association for small contract carriers, owner operators. And I want to tell them and work with them as to how to grow the business, how to be more strategic in growing the business. How do you not get sucked into this vortex of only being on the load boards, right? Mm-hmm. So I refuse to get angry at the marketplace, and I refuse our team from getting angry. And we just say, okay, well, how do we talk to our customers more strategically? How do we tell the customers, gosh, that 50% of all drivers drive for 100 trucks and less, and the average size fleet is 5.2, and that's the highest number it's ever been, at least in modern history. These carriers are needed. These carriers are desperately needed. But how do we convince the shippers to when the market turns soft? This is what the shippers do every single time. Oh, we got to get rid of all the brokers. Well, that's bad for the brokers, right? It's bad for the shippers because they're setting up the next worse capacity crisis for them. Because those big carriers that they all flee to, they have a smaller and smaller percentage of the driver pool. And you know who it hurts the most is it hurts that small carrier, because if the brokers aren't getting the freight and I won't say the big names, but the big names are getting it, as soon as the market turns, those big names are tapped out faster than ever before, right? And
the freight can't find its way to the small carriers.
We sweated out the small guys, like, well, how about, Mr. and Mrs. Shipper, we say we're not going to throw out all the brokers and the small carriers. How about we right size?
Jeff, how do you see that changing with the proliferation of more like online platforms where smaller carriers can register themselves and make themselves a little bit more visible, but potentially maybe it's, not all entirely the same, because it still might be the case where a shipper, drops that broker that is a digital platform in the same way that you're explaining. So I guess maybe that wouldn't have too much of a difference.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think that I'll say a couple things. I think that the software that I was at a freight conference, an economic conference, and then actually one of them spoke last week at the Knit League, and there's always this big question as to, well, how come carriers have been able to weather this storm better than past storms? And not to say that, we went up like 16% in driver count and carrier count during COVID, and we're not back down yet to 2019 levels, which is a good thing, right? It's a good thing for jobs, employment, and not losing your homes, and it's not great for rates, right? Because rates are a function of supply and demand. But I credit a number of things. I credit the software, and whether you call that digital marketplace or just the software that motor carriers, drivers are able to use. It's far better than ever before. Brokers, and shippers could sell freight off the East Coast in the 90s for like 80 cents a mile every single day of the week and Sunday for like a decade, and that was good, and no one knew any better. But now with the data that folks have, they know, like, oh, I'm not doing that for 80 or whatever it is today. I know with the bell-shaped curve where the rates are, and I can, so that the returns are way better. They're way smarter, and then they can collect more efficiently. So technology has enabled this growth of the drivers and growth of carriers incredibly, and it's good for all of us, right? We need that.
So the people, the pro transparency folks, I guess why do they say they need it? What do they say they're going to do with it if it is enforced? Like, why is it important to them? Like, from their perspective, like from what you hear them say.
Chris, do you want to take first crack at that? And I've got some opinions too.
Yeah. I mean, we've had discussions obviously with these groups, and to get to that point, Reed, is, hey, what's your end goal here? I mean, are you looking to eliminate brokers? What are you looking to do? And they always go back to, hey, we're trying to find out who are the bad players in the space, who are the companies who are taking advantage of small owner operators, so that these folks are more educated in their decision on
and by taking advantage, that just means making a high margin on a load. That's what that means. Yeah.
I mean, from their perspective, yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's generally what they point towards. We obviously have concerns beyond that of what this information could be utilized for. But that's kind of what they point towards. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they point toward. I think that I think it's playing to your base. I don't think it's representing the interests of your base. It's playing to the noise in your base, and I think it's irresponsible. And why I say I'd start a trade association for owner operators. I deal with corporate procurement, folks all the time. You want to give corporate procurement folks a target. That target is going to be whatever I don't care if it's 20% margin, 10% margin, 5% margin, or 4% margin. Anything you give them becomes a target. And they're not going to get rid of the broker because they are not going to hire more staff.
A target in which sense, Jeff?
Pardon me?
A target in which stuff? In which sense?
And the margin becomes known to all parties, right? Out the window does the value. So like some of the things that I do for that margin, I employ, lots of people. I spend a lot in insurance. I spend tons in freight security because we move some high value stuff. Insurance around that and quality around that. Technology. I'm automating the shipper's appointment scheduling. I'm using technology to avoid fraud. I'm investing. No, shippers aren't doing any of this stuff, so they're hiring me, and I don't charge for any of those activities. I just make it all in what I built to the shipper. So what's going to happen, right, if we disclose this margin, is out the window. Again, my customers, the transportation logistics folks, they know what I'm doing, but the procurement folks that dictate who you're going to use and what the price is going to be, that is a recipe for disaster for the small carriers, for the small drivers, those ones that right. And why? Hey, I see that on this lane you guys made this. We're gonna whittle that down. You can maximum 5%. Oh, okay. Well, where am I going to get that? Where's the market going to get that? Out of the hides of everybody has to do the loads, right? The market finds and again, back to, let's not get emotional about this. It's just clinical. It's supply and demand. It's economics 101. So if you play forward this notion, this playing to your base BS, you're only harming yourself and everybody else, that's trying to instead grow the market. We have think about this. The market for owner operators has gone from 20%, 22% of the marketplace of drivers to 50%. To 50, and that's in a decade. Where can it be in the future if we think strategically and we work together? But on this, I just don't get it. Brokers and small carriers are partners growing a market share that never existed, and in record numbers. in record dollars, in record numbers of jobs for that segment of driver. And you want to reverse it all with this?
Yeah, Jeff, I have a question for you pertaining to the changes in the rates as the market cycles back and forth. I don't particularly have an opinion on this, so I'm just curious. Like, I remember during the COVID, when COVID hit, I remember the rates plummeted, and then there was this period where a lot of the brokers that I would talk to were saying, margins right now are like crazy, but the rates for the carriers were still really low. How do you think about when at those inflection points when the rates significantly change? I'm not saying I'm advocating like for rate transparency or against it. I'm just saying that is there some way, or is there some future path where maybe there's at least, maybe you don't have full transparency in terms of like what exactly the margin per se is, but maybe there's some rules around abuse or kind of collusion, perhaps, like to keep rates on carriers lower, but brokers basically get the better end of the stick at the same time. Like during those moments where there's a pretty steep difference in the on one side of two sides.
Yeah. So when you're talking about is, okay, so rates are at a higher level and then all of a sudden the market plummets, right? Where you have those like imbalances in rates, right, that you just described, are in where brokers and carriers have what are called contract pricing. Contract pricing are long-term prices, and they're set. They're set for a year to 2 years typically. Now, recently, shippers have gone to market quarterly to set quarterly rates because again, the money flows from the shipper.
Sure.
So the time period at which those inflated margins exist are shorter and shorter and shorter because the shippers they recognize it and they go for the jugular as quickly as they can. So so there's a moment in time, where when the market drops precipitously and you have contract rates, that your rates, but the question is, what you've just described is market control, and who's going to control the market, and who's going to say what's right and what's wrong? To me.
Do you think there should be somebody who says what's right and wrong in that sense?
Absolutely not. I mean, why? Why would the market is doing a really good job at that?
I'm just asking because like I just want to get some clarity on like where exactly I over the course of the conversation it was made more clear that you're like the margins shouldn't be made like fully transparent. So like I got that over time, but like if we sometimes like more clearly stating kind of like what the position would be helpful too.
Is there? I mean, is there a discussion of a margin cap? Like, are folks like, okay, like how do they decide? So say I'm a carrier, I take a load. This transparency rule is in effect. I find out broker X I got a load from made a 40% margin on a load. Like, am I like, what am I doing with that information? I guess, like, what do they say they're going to do with that? Like, are they just going to be mad? Or are they going to try to call the shipper up and be like, hey, you're getting ripped off? Like, what is the goal there? Like, what do you do with that information?
Chris would have a better shot at that. I mean, I don't know that you can do anything with it except be angry. But Chris?
Yeah, I mean, that's that's one of the concerns I think that we have is what are they going to do with this information? Are they going to go to that shipper and potentially try to back solicit work at a lower cost? But Christian, to your point about collusion, this point was brought up during those truck protests during the pandemic, and there was a DOJ investigation on some of these allegations of TIA or the industry getting together and colluding on prices and making 80-70% margins on the top.
For the record, I'm not that familiar with.
I'm just saying some of the allegations that were being thrown around. And the DOJ reached out to several of the large load boards. They reached out to several of the large publicly traded brokers in the space and other companies. And they got a good education on how the market works. And they came back and they said, this is supply and demand economics. There's no collusion going on here. The market is driving what the rates are. This industry has not gotten together and setting and pricing.
I mean, there's 20,000 brokers. Like, how could they collude? I mean, that'd be pretty.
The only way that I would see it happening is the larger ones, but
that'd be pretty impressive if they managed to pull that off. I don't know. Anyway, Paul's got something here. What do you got for us, Paul?
Yeah, my internet connection's kind of bad right now. I'm not sure if you could hear me well.
Okay,
Are you able to hear me well?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Chris, first of all, congratulations on the promotion to being CEO of TIA. That's awesome. Happy to hear that. And I wanted, before we get into more about like what's going on with like TIA and like what you're looking forward to, I guess accomplishing when you take over as CEO, I'm kind of wondering if maybe you, Chris, or Jeff know of any brokerages right now that actually are transparent with their carriers when it comes to rates. Is there anyone like that on the market?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm guessing Chris. Yeah.
I may have heard of, a couple people who are, but I mean, at the top of my head, no. But,
Got it.
I vaguely over the last 13 years, I remember maybe one or two people saying, hey, we're transparent with them already. But that's again, that's their choice. Just like the ICC said.
Exactly.
We want a free, open, competitive marketplace. If that's what they choose to do, go for it. Yeah.
But what I'm charging, what I charge my customer isn't for the transportation only, right? So that's it. I think that
of course
people keep forgetting, the rate. Oh, the rate's the rate. Well, no, the rate's all the. I just flew a team of 6 people out for the quarterly business review. Each one of those people has a competency that's helping you understand your business better. No one's paying for that, the flight and the hotels, and I'm paying for that.
Yeah.
So it's not. We have to really, when we think about brokerage, we have to separate that there is some direct connection. And obviously, there's a huge connection, right, between A and B. But we have to separate that that's all that there is, right? That there's more to it. And I just wanted to, if we're going to have a conversation about, rate, this, someone should have some sort of a say about margin. When contract rates are stable and the market drops, I'd sure like, and I'm being totally sarcastic here, I'd sure like some help when my contract rates are here and the market goes like this, because I'm losing money like literally losing money hand over fist, and I'm struggling to stay above water, and I'm talking to my customers and they're like, no, you can't touch the rates. So like, who's going to help me there? No one's ever helped me in 63 years. No one's ever helped me. So I'm not looking for help, and I just recognize that I have to run my business effectively. This is the laws of supply and demand.
Definitely. And I'm wondering, Jeff, do you think that the majority of truckers and carriers understand that and would agree with you? Whereas there's only like a small portion of let's say the carrier population that's making like a big deal out of this, like wanting the transparency? Or do you think there's like a majority of like trucking companies and carriers behind the transparency?
I'd have a hard time answering that. I mean, look at our country. We can be so far apart on issues, right? So
very divided.
I don't want to. So I would imagine there's people on both sides of this issue. I think that when you're truly informed on this particular issue and you think down, you look down the road of what this would do to your industry and how if there's some notion that, this will make it easier for us to disintermediate the brokers, you have another think coming. That's not what we do. Load, finding a truck for a load is the tip of the spear for my business and most other brokers. We're doing a lion's share of other work, related to transportation, risk management, and scheduling, and then using the data to drive organizational behaviors. Hey, you're giving me these loads with 24 hours notice or less. I used to get them for 2 days. I could keep the prices low if you gave me 2 days notice. Oh, I didn't even know we were doing that. We're using all this kind of data to change behavior. And when we think about it as, from load A to B, you made what? No, we didn't. You know, there's more than that.
Yeah.
Is the brokerage? Sorry, Chris. I mean, you might have an answer to this, but like, is the brokerage business model like even viable in a world where like margins are capped at a certain percentage? Like, because my experience as a broker was sometimes you made a bunch of money and sometimes you lost a ton of money. And like, if your upside is capped but your downside is uncapped, like how does the business model even work? Maybe the answer is it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's the answer.
I think it will definitely work. Maybe there won't be as many, like there'll be more brokers maybe going out of business.
Because I mean, you talk to some of these carriers, and it's like
you just don't take unprofitable.
There are people who legitimately think that brokers make like 70% on every load.
Yeah.
I'd probably still be a broker if that were true for me. If that were still the case for me, I'd still be a broker. Maybe I just suck. Maybe I was just bad at it. I don't know.
What if there was? I mean, what do you guys think about if there was like industry-wide stats? I mean, I think there are already, but there's average numbers right now about margins, but maybe
it's like 13%, isn't it? Isn't something like that?
Yeah, 13 to 15%.
Publicly traded companies release that information in their filings. It's been out there for as long. So what have you gained from that? What have you gained from that knowledge?
Yeah, we include some of that data report in our obviously our 3PL market report as well. But Paul, I want to go back to one of your questions about the pool of carriers that are kind of invested in this issue, if you will. During the time of those protests, again, going back to the pandemic, we went to FMCSA and we said, hey, you've got this national consumer complaint database, which you've told us there's 80,000 complaints in there about fraudulent activity. How many complaints are about this issue of broker transparency? And they came back to us and said 0. There's not one single complaint in the consumer complaint database about it. And, I think a few after the protests had gone on started trickling in because of it. And, carriers might say that that's, an issue if they don't want to get, lose business potentially from a broker, potentially blacklist them, et cetera. But there are regulations on the book already of prohibition of coercion. A broker cannot cost a carrier business for, not following regulations or, telling them that we're not following 371.3. If you ask again, you're going to lose business. There's coercion regulations right in place in that. But this is such a rampant problem that's been going on for years, as some of these groups have said. Why were there no complaints with the agency?
Chris, to build on that, we've been I've been in business now 63 years, and one transaction in 63 years has ever been questioned by a carrier, and it was after I had a back and forth, and I think it was Traffic World magazine, an opinion piece. I went back and forth with a guy from a particular trade association 3 different times. And it was a big deal. And it was just like 15 years ago, maybe. And I think that must have drummed up, hey, let me check that out. But it's a total non-issue.
Yeah. Which organizations are like behind the rate transparency? Is it like OIDA? Is that one of them that's like really pushing this?
Yeah, there was 2 organizations that filed petitions with the FMCSA. There was OIDA being one of them, and then SBTC was the other one.
Okay, so there's probably some kind of, I guess, friction between TIA and OIDA, I assume.
Generally, no. I mean, we get along very well with OIDA. I've worked very closely with their government relations folks over the years. Consider them very good personal friends. And 99% of issues we work on, we're in lockstep together and supportive of each other. This issue, obviously, being we're on a different side of things, and that happens in Washington D.C. from time to time. But no, I would say our relationship with OIDA is strong.
Okay, so
I don't speak for them, not us, but I look at them as an ally.
I would love to get them on this. Actually, that'd be pretty cool to get everyone on here. But I'm like you obviously, Chris, have had conversations with them on this topic, and Jeff, I'm assuming you've also had conversations, and it doesn't seem to have moved the needle at all in their, like, I guess, opinion. And maybe that's because they're also like, they don't want to upset all their owner operators and members by maybe agreeing with you. Maybe they want to like show that they're standing strong with this case, even though maybe they also personally understand like the difficulties behind it. Just curious, like how those conversations have looked like, and maybe debates or if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of conversation with them about it. I think some of those conversations are still ongoing. But we have not come to a point where we have mutually agreed on a potential solution for this problem. And we have our members that we have to advocate for, and they're a great organization that does a lot of great advocacy work for their members as well. So yeah, I mean, we're not at a point where we're going to agree on this issue. We may not get there. It's supposed to come out at the end of the month, and we'll see what the comment period happens, and we'll see what the agency decides to do with it. But yeah, I mean, we've had discussions with them, absolutely.
Chris, when it gets really down to it, there's obviously some point of disagreement. One side says rates should be transparent, the other side says they shouldn't. When it gets down to it, like what it really is that like the one, if you were to summarize it in one bullet, what would be the main point as to why the other side argues their perspective? If you were to steelman the argument, basically.
Yeah, I mean, our argument is that this is an outdated regulation that was written at a period of time for an industry that couldn't operate drastically different than it does now. We're in a very open, competitive marketplace that's extremely transparent, as Jeff pointed out. Currently, there's a lot of information and data out there that companies can go and search for this. And it's really a solution in search for a problem. There isn't a problem in the marketplace. If we're going to complain about any sort of economic downturn or supply and demand issue, we do nothing but complain. And we have some concerns with it. It is a regulation that is in place. If somebody were to request information, they should adhere towards it. We do not want to see that expanded. We did file a petition around the same time that OOIDA and SPTC did to eliminate this, because we do feel it's outdated and unnecessary. That petition was denied, which is fine. But we have strong concerns with this. I think in light of the Supreme Court decision on the Chevron decision, there's a 2016 Trade Secrets Act that was signed into law by President Obama. Pricing and any sort of business information is included within that. So we're not sure any of this information can be publicly put out there under the Defend Trade Secrets Act. So we have some concerns with it. We'll provide comments and we'll see what direction the agency takes.
Chris, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your experience working, I guess, in like the government side of things. Like, do things change when a new president comes into office, or when you're dealing with the FMCSA and those institutions? Is it more or less like all the same?
I mean, based on my 13 years here and dealing directly with the FMCSA, obviously with a few different presidents at this point, to be candid, a lot of the same issues we're still dealing with. Not a whole lot has changed. I think you may get some different priorities of a certain administration, and I think with certainly under this administration, with the Department of Labor, been a little bit more aggressive on kind of muddying the waters of employee versus independent contractor status. But thinking of the DOT side of things and looking at Jeff, something like CSA 2010 or safety ratings for motor carriers. There's still 92% of trucking companies that don't have a safety rating. That's an issue that him and I have been working on for 13 years at this point, with really no movement. So it's kind of status quo, no matter who's kind of in office, unfortunately, from the agency.
Okay. 20 years for me, Chris. I've been working on that.
I guess we have 2 minutes here to like kind of put a bow on this. Like, obviously brokers can't really do their jobs without small carriers, because that's who takes the lion's share of their freight. And I would argue that a lot of small carriers wouldn't be able to be in business because brokers are their biggest customer, right? That's where they get all their freight, whether it's on the load board or whether they have a relationship, whatever. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, brokers give them their freight. What needs to be done to like improve the general relationship the high level relationship between the two entities. They can't really live without each other, and yet they're always kind of going at each other. Like what needs to change? Like what can we do about that?
Yeah, just dialogue and understanding, I think is the biggest. I mentioned the behavioral stuff. We have data. If we have data and we talk to our customers and our customers' suppliers, when people see that information and they understand, they can take action. It makes sense to them. But I think that sometimes we make decisions based on not having all of the data, not having the perspective, not knowing our history, right, and how we got to where we got to, and not also strategically how are we trying to move forward, right? And so I don't. A lot of people think that we have this driver shortage, and that's trade association telling you that. We don't have a driver shortage. We have like 1 million more drivers in the marketplace, and guess what? Most of them are driving for themselves or small carriers today. And that's a huge American success story, and it doesn't get enough press. So again, I think to me it's education and communication and trying to share the vision of where we've been and where we can go if we work together.
Awesome. Jeff and Chris, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to talk to you both. As Paul mentioned, I think that it would be awesome to have a further follow-on conversation, maybe in a debate civil debate like format with the counterparty, on the topic. That would be really cool, just to get a sense on both sides and talk about this further, because it's really interesting. But nonetheless, thank you guys so much for coming on. We'll speak hopefully soon again, and thank you everybody for listening. So we will see everybody. Any final thoughts from anybody?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to be on. Thanks, guys.
Agreed. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
Thank you both.
Thanks. All right, see you guys. Take care. Bye.